Hello, fellow Mooters. This is Dr. Judy. I'm here for you for part 3 of our mini series around training and taming the nervous system. So if you're just joining us, there is a previous video that has about a 40-minute introduction and overview around thinking like a lawyer. I reviewed part 1 in a separate video talking about high energy, high stakes, managing emotions during stressful but meaningful things. And then part 2 was the previous video before this one, looking at managing conflict, problem solving, and working with others, and how we support staying out of judgment and avoiding toxic interactions. So in this video, we're going to talk about accepting feedback, even if it is critical and constructive, and then coping with doom spiraling. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the thinking traps or thinking errors that we can get caught up in when we are just thinking about life or receiving feedback from others or dealing with difficult things, and they can trap us and get us hung up. So I'm going to talk to you about ways to support that for yourself. This video might be a little bit longer than the previous ones. All of the videos are ranging in the 25 to 35-minute mark, a little bit longer than I actually originally planned, but I hope that you're finding them to be meaningful and supportive. And as always, if you want follow-up with any components that we've talked about, feel free to reach out to me anytime. So we've got the coping with stress and doom spiral ready for us to launch into this great conversation. And this conversation here, when we're thinking about responding to feedback from others, is really about challenging our own default towards fear. So if you think back to my first video, I talked about the states and traits that we are in, from a sense of calm through alert and alarm and fear. And it is from a place of fear, from triggered emotions, that we find ourselves in situations where it's difficult to accept feedback, especially if it is critical. In learning environments, the critical feedback is usually constructive. It's to help us learn and grow. However, we can slip back into these primitive states of human fear, and we respond to the feedback in ways that we maybe hoped we had would have responded better, or in ways that aren't reflective of who we are as critical and constructive and learning practitioners ourselves. And so I want you to think about this notion of responding to feedback by understanding. Remember when I talked about the handy model of the brain back in video 1? This amygdala here is pretty uncivil. Some psychologists refer to it as the barking dog of the house that is the brain. It comes alive, it comes flying out of the gate because it has to protect us. So that can result in behavior that's pretty uncivil, or that is defiant or oppositional or defensive. And I want you to just know that's human nature. That's how the heart can respond when the brain is offline. So it's not really about, calming or taming that heart sense that's responding with mad or sad to critical feedback. It's more about being aware that that's going to happen, and how quickly we can calm that part of ourselves to get back into the thinking part of the brain that is strong and aware enough to respond versus react. So some of this research comes from Daniel Kahneman, who is a psychologist and economist, Nobel Prize winning economist and psychologist, who reminds us that we have 2 parts at least up there in our brain working to manage the brain, mind, body in different environments. And he calls it system 1 and system 2 thinking. So the system 1 response is that first response that comes out of the gate, that's heart-centered, full of emotion, fiery, thoughtless, powerful, etc. And the system 2 thinking is the smarter, more productive problem solver that does exist in us, that we have to learn to, calm and bring forward when we recognize that emotion is often leading system 1. So if you're interested in more of this, you can look up Daniel Kahneman's work. as a behavioral psychologist. And I believe his most recent book that talks about this is called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And we want to harness and access the power of both parts of our brain, mind, body. But when in conflict or when receiving constructive and critical feedback, we definitely want to be able to respond from that system to take our time and be thoughtful in how we engage with others. So how we do this is, a couple of ways. I'm going to speak to the cognitive part of your brain here first and give you some strategies and then talk about emotions. So first of all, we want to understand the difference between reacting and responding. And I've talked a little bit about that in the previous videos, that reaction comes from the heart, the gut, the system one. Aware of that, awareness of that is key. We know that's a reaction. That's not going to be our response, however, to a situation. Responding is actually thoughtful and wise. So how do I take that step back, take a deep breath, if needed, when in conflict, and get my brain back online so that I can respond wisely in different situations? When I am in that responding brain, I'm going to be curious. So there's that word again. I want to seek to understand the other person's feedback, how it's relevant to myself, and proactively think about how I can integrate that feedback so I can be better. What I'm remembering when I'm receiving feedback in an educational context is that everybody is there for my growth. No one is there to challenge me and to create fear and terror. That can happen, but that's not anyone's purpose. Everyone is there to help us to learn and to grow, and it's our job to participate in that as best as we can. When I'm receiving critical and constructive feedback, I'm always kind of looking for things that I can be thankful for. So I want to have some humility and be able to know that I'm always at a place in life where I can learn and grow, and my learning and my growth is good for me. So what can I be grateful for given the feedback that I'm getting from different people who are providing me with feedback? Next thing to remember is that I want to take what I can from this experience and let the rest go. Not all critical or constructive feedback, actually, not all critical feedback is going to be constructive, and not all constructive feedback is going to be necessary. So I have to be able to kind of discern that and take what I can from the learning experience. Like I said, let the rest go. So next, I want to talk a little bit about some of the components of how to do this. And I'm going to bring them all up here. Oops, there are 5 different components that can support this. Most of them I've already kind of talked about. So we want to keep an open mind, focus on improvement and growth. Don't respond right away. Sometimes it helps to take that deep breath, take a few seconds, let it set in. Get back online to be able to think rationally. If there's any chance that there's an understanding, once we're in that thinking brain, we can ask questions and just seek more clarity on the feedback that we're getting. Sometimes we misunderstand feedback, and that can create more emotion and more stress, and that's not good. And then going back to the thankful piece, just being humble and gracious, because this really is an opportunity to learn and grow. I have to remind myself about that a lot. As someone who has pursued education and higher education for most of my life, I've always been under the microscope and had to defend my ideas and present my ideas where there are others there who are challenging them. But they're not challenging them for the sake of creating anger and fear. They're challenging them so I can grow and learn. And so that's so important that we do that. And last but not least, be able to differentiate between those who are providing us with constructive feedback, critical and constructive feedback to support our growth, and those who are just simply providing feedback that doesn't help us, that keeps us down. Right. And so if I can just sort of differentiate and be like, what feedback am I going to hang on to? What feedback am I going to let go of? And if there are any haters out there, I'm just going to ignore those people because thinking about them is not going to be conducive to my success or my growth in my work. So understanding emotions is key for this. And in understanding emotions, I've talked about this a little bit in previous videos. The first thing I want you to remember is that we are not our emotions. They are part of us. So if I have some anxiety that shows up in my life, I don't want to define myself by anxiety. I am not anxiety. Anxiety is an emotion that comes into my life, and just as easily as it comes, it can go. So emotions are like clouds in the sky or fish in the sea or waves in the ocean. They come and they go. That's the first thing we want to understand about emotions. The second thing is that emotions carry information. So I sometimes do an activity with people where I ask them to think about one of their primary emotions other than the fundamental emotion of love. We were all born with that, number one emotion of loving the self and loving others so that we can protect and connect and survive. Secondary or primary to that, there's lots of different ways to describe emotions, are kind of the three emotions that come from that love state, which are emotions that come flying out of the gate like the barking dog to save us if we're in trouble. And they are mad, sad, and scared. Beyond that, there are a myriad of emotions that exist out there that we describe in a variety of ways that are used to protect us in different situations and connect us with people who can help. But sometimes what I do with people is ask them to think of one of these three emotions, mad, sad, or scared, and imagine the last time they embodied this emotion. What were they seeing, thinking, feeling, hearing? What does this emotion look like, sound like, feel like? You might even give it a size or a color or a shape. And I get people to spend a little bit of time with one of these so-called negative emotions. And then I remind them that these emotions are your friend. These emotions carry information. They're here to share with you things you need to know about yourself to grow and move forward. So I say, what is your mad telling you? What is your sad telling you, right? And for me, my mad is often telling me I need to be loved. My mad is often telling me I need to be cared about or heard or respected. And it's dialing into that part of myself that knows what I want and knows what I need, and then can start to reframe that into language that I can use to calm myself or communicate with myself, or if needed, share with others so that they can support me. So I want you to remember that you're not your emotions. Emotions are a wave. They come and go. They have a job, and their primary job is that protect, connect, right? To take care of the self that they love. And I share this piece with you here in this component around critical feedback because we can often have big emotions that we don't like when we're getting feedback. Just remember those emotions are showing up to link arms with you and help protect you. And you can say to them, welcome, thank you for being here. I got this. I'm okay, right? It helps to have a bit of a dialogue with your emotions. That's a healthy way to engage with yourself and to process life. So in addition to that, I want you to understand, going back to where we started with that system 1 and system 2 thinking, our brains, as a reminder, are trying to predict anything and everything in the world around us that might go wrong. And that's so that they can protect us or connect us, right? And so when we know that, or we understand that, we can use that knowledge to do better, to do different, right? So understand that if I make mistakes and somebody's drawing my attention to it, I can learn from this, I can grow, I can name the issue, the problem, the emotion, and tame it. We have to name it to tame it. That's what Dan Siegel says. So don't be afraid of saying, that's anger, that's anxiety, it's not me, and here's why it's showing up, and here's what I can do about it. Another important thing I want you to know about emotions, unlike this tiger who's about to launch over at someone, is that when we have big emotions, We want to delay, distract, or do nothing. We don't want to act in big emotions. We don't want to make decisions in big emotions. We just want to stop when we don't know what to do, notice, ask why the emotion is showing up, what it's there for. And in order to do that, we have to get some sense of calm. That's where, mindfulness and meditation comes from, because those are two ways that really help us to center, ground the self, and connect with big emotions. I do it through journaling. I have some journals. If you want one, you can stop by my office in Law 180 and pick one up. But I do a lot of journaling with my emotions. That helps me to center and ground and get to know them. And the great news is, the more time we spend understanding our own personal emotions, the more we can tame them, and the more we can communicate with others out of big emotion, without being triggered. Our emotions ask, where is the threat? And it's up to our thinking brain or mind to say, there is no threat. I am okay. I hope that makes sense and can help you to get back into that space where you can speak from the cortex, right? So just going to outline a couple of ways that you can do that. And I think I kind of spoke to this for the most part already. Ask yourself, what are my needs? These are cortex activities. Step away, breathe, be mindful, aware, and attune. I can't say this enough. You're going to read anything on the internet about managing mental health, managing mooting, managing high stakes, dealing with conflict. They're all going to come back to the same fundamental things. In these situations, we want to remain mindful and responsive over reactive. And how we do that is through some very obvious, well talked about, but also well researched for a reason, activities. Mindful breathing, pausing and reflecting and journaling, as I just talked about, identifying and naming triggers, self-compassion. I'm going to talk in the final video about self-compassion a little bit more. And actually, I'll unpack a lot of these a little bit more in the final video, where we're looking more at beefing up resilience strategies. We're going to seek to understand, use visualization techniques, grounding techniques. I can scan my body for where my emotions are showing up. Me personally, they show up with a tight chest. They show up with warm, hot upper body tension. I want to be aware of that. Sometimes a gurgling stomach. All of those are signals that my emotions are out of whack, and I've got to do some work with calming and relaxation. And gratitude, thankfulness, looking to what I can be optimistic about, or seeing the silver lining. Those are all ways to help to calm the nervous system. Again, I said in one of the earlier videos, the more I can wire my brain for optimistic outlook or gratitude, the more I'm going to look for those things, and the easier it's going to be to look for those things. The easier it is to find things to be grateful for in the world and things to be optimistic about, the more positive we are, right? And that's something we have to train ourselves to be able to do. And practice doesn't make perfect, but practice is the process of getting there and the process of growth. So to have calm conversations when you are receiving critical or constructive feedback, stay grounded, breathe, challenge your default towards fear, manage those emotions, and when you can later on, complete the stress response cycle that I talked about before, and just know that the entire process from beginning to end is something we need to be active about, in tune with, and reflective on in order to learn and grow. So I have a slide here about calm conversations. I'm going to come to this in a later video because I want to jump to some of the thinking traps that we can find ourselves in and unpack those to round out this video. So I'll come back to those calm conversations in the final component of our mini series. Thinking traps, stinking thinking, thought distortions, these spirals that we find ourselves in with our thoughts that we go down the drain with, are very common. If you're human, chances are you have found yourself in any one of these 10 or so that I'm going to share with you. I just want to share them with you so you can A, recognize that you're human, B, think about what you can do about them when they show up, and C, just work in life to manage them and quiet them so they don't yank you down the drain. So thought spiraling is pretty common. And I'll share, like I said, 10 different ways that this shows up in us as humans to greater or lesser degrees. You might keep a checklist. If you recognize these, jot down some ideas that go along with them and come back to this video anytime to reflect more on them if you want some more thoughtful time with these thinking traps, stinking thinking. So the first one is all or nothing thinking. This is seeing things in black and white terms. You believe something is either going to be perfect or it's a complete failure. There's no in between. This thinking trap can be shifted by challenging it to find that middle ground. There always is a gray area, okay? Nothing is black or white. There are many shades of gray. So seek to find those shades of gray in the experiences where you feel like everything is black and white. The next thinking trap is, sorry, it clicked over there, overgeneralization. So this is when a negative event can feel like it's always going to happen. We are overgeneralizing things and ascribing negativity to a large scale to something that's typically pretty small or not happening as often as we think it is. How we shift from this is we look for evidence of times where we were successful. So if we have a mooting experience or we get some feedback and it's overwhelming, it's got some areas for growth, we feel like it was very critical, we don't walk away and say, I am a failure, I always screw things up. Recognize that as an overgeneralization and come back to, what are the mistakes I made? How can I fix it? What did I do well in this circumstance? Do not define yourself by the one outcome of that moment. The next thinking trap is mental filters. So this is where we kind of put on those glasses and we only see things one way. We make the negative larger than life. How we support that or shift from that is to try to have balance and notice the positive as well. So you'll see a lot of themes repeating in these. They just go by different names, but we describe them in different ways psychologically because they do show up differently for different people. And I want you to have a good understanding of what some of these things can be. Some of us have those negative filter glasses on all day, every day. And that would be a horrible way to live. We would really struggle to see the positive in the world if we couldn't lift those glasses and just shift. Again, one of the best ways to do that is to have a gratitude practice. Once a day, write down 3 things you're grateful for. That's it. That practice is going to help to wire your brain to look a little bit more towards the positive than the negative. The next thinking trap is something that's known as discounting the positive. So we reject good experiences. Something good happens to us. We say, nope, it wasn't good enough. It doesn't count. I wasn't on my best game that day. This is where we really struggle to accept compliments from others. If we notice this happening, you can make the shift by practicing accepting compliments, by accepting your achievements without brushing them off and minimizing them. It's so important that we see the positive for what it is. We embrace it. We give ourselves a giant hug with it. And we're just a-okay with knowing that good things are happening too, even though it's stressful and it's hard. Another one is jumping to conclusions. So this is assuming we know what other people think. It's a little bit like mind reading, which is one of the other thinking traps. And it's fortune telling, predicting a negative before it actually happens. How we shift this one is we challenge our assumptions. We ask ourselves if there's actual facts or evidence that support these negative thoughts or these thoughts that I'm making up in my own head. There comes that whole shitty first draft again that Brene Brown talks about. We so often tell these stories and they're not healthy and they're not helpful. Our mind assumes the worst, right? And there's no reason or rationale that we can see for that. Another thinking trap is magnification, catastrophizing. We might be more familiar with this one, blowing things out of proportion, thinking that the worst is going to happen. Just don't do this. If you find yourself doing this before heading into a stressful moment, it's going to increase the stress. It's going to increase the likelihood that your prefrontal cortex is offline. You're running with your heart, and you won't be able to think in the situation. You want to calm catastrophizing, change the narrative, shift to what could happen, what could go well, and things you will, change the whole narrative on how things are going to go for you. Another one is emotional reasoning. So this is believing that feelings are facts. So if you feel stupid or guilty, then you assume you must be. So we want to be very careful about reminding ourselves, like I said earlier, that emotions are a wave. They come and they go. They are not absolute truths. They don't stick around and get stuck to us forever. Emotional states are just little bits of information that don't necessarily tell the truth. Should statements is another trap that we can get caught up in, and we want to be careful to not should ourselves into a corner. Using words like I should, I must, I have to, that can create shame and blame. And so what we want to do is shift to I can, I will, I'm going to try. Language that's a little more flexible. Should language is not flexible, it's very labeling, and it's just generally unhealthy for us. So pay attention to how often your mind says I should or I have to. Labeling is another trap, and this is placing a fixed label on ourselves like I'm a failure, I'm stupid, I'm not good enough. And how we shift that is just, again, more flexible language. I'm not a failure, I made a mistake. We all make mistakes. We can fix our mistakes, return stronger, learn from them, and grow. So you'll notice that a lot of these thinking traps are rigid types of thinking that we want to break free from and shift to more flexible ways of seeing the world. Another thinking trap, and there are 10 in total, so I think I'm at the last one here, is personalization and blame. So this is taking responsibility for things beyond our control, blaming ourselves, blaming others. What we want to do to shift from this is reflect on what we can control, let go of the rest, and simply move forward. How we do a lot of this is by breathing, calming the nervous system, and thinking our way through. So these are just some ways that you can help yourself to break free from those traps. Feel free to go back and take a look. I'll post some handouts with some of this information as well in your Canvas module or page. So I would take some time to challenge your thoughts, reflect on them, and seek some perspective by, through metacognition, thinking about that thinking and checking yourself before you wreck yourself. That's a famous line that a colleague of mine used to say, and I love it for these thinking trap scenarios where we are apt to spiral out of control. All right, that's it for video 3, and we'll see you in part 4 whenever we find you there. Take care.